Let me kick things off by saying that I know making a video claiming that 1 year in gaming is better than all other years in gaming is a really bad idea and only invites negativity to my channel. But I thought about it for a while and kind of reached the conclusion that even if you don't like the answer that I came to, I mean, what's the worst you're going to do? Leave a bad comment? So for years and years, I've said somewhat jokingly, but also somewhat seriously, that gaming peaked in 2004, and this is mainly because it was a big year for me personally, with games like Halo 2, Half-Life 2, Snake Eater, and so on. Obviously, this is a very subjective take, but I do think it was a great year for the industry. In fact, the original idea for this video was going to be me proving to you why 2004 was the best year for games ever. But then I thought, why not go bigger? And then I began a long and exhausting journey of putting together a spreadsheet that contained hundreds of games and judging all of those games across 8 different categories so I could finally settle this once and for all. Hi, my name is Inepsayan, and please join me as we dive in to determine once and for all the greatest year in gaming history. Okay, I just want to mention this up top. Please don't take this too seriously, it is just a YouTube video. But let me walk you through how this is going to work so you can kind of understand how I arrived at my conclusion. One of the main things to note here is the time period that we're covering. Obviously gaming started in the 70s with Pong and Atari and such, but for this video I'm only covering 1985 and onwards. So I'm strictly talking about post-video game crash of 83, when the industry was finding its feet again, and once we had reached the point where there were multiple home console options available in all 3 key regions of Japan, US and Europe. My initial approach to this video was going to be super easy, where I would take the aggregate review score from each of the best games from each year and then take those scores and create another aggregate review score for each year. The problem with that approach is that it would get inconsistent very quickly. Not only is it inaccurate to compare a review score for, let's say, Streets of Rage 2 to Far Cry 3, because things change over time, but also if every game isn't reviewed by the same amount of people, then things get real messy. So after that realization, I decided to scrap the whole review score thing altogether and decided to search across the entire internet, well, actually mainly just the big gaming websites, and see if they had posted a top 50 or top 100 games of all time list. Then I took every one of those games from every one of those lists to form a more refined list of games that appear multiple times on each of these lists, which left me with just under 300 games from 1985 to the present day. Now at this point you're probably thinking, well, the job is easy, you just find the year with the most number of games and call it a day. But I wanted to dig a little deeper than that and judge them against multiple factors so I could finally settle this debate once and for all. We're talking about both quantity and quality, along with a bunch of other categories that I've devised. So now let me walk you through the journey of discovering the definitive winner. Okay, let me get this out of the way now. The best year in gaming isn't 2004. I mean, it's not even close, but we'll move forward with the video anyway. As I mentioned earlier, I have 8 categories that I've come up with to help me find my answer. So let me break down each of those along with providing some examples to further illustrate my point. Sales. This is me basically asking the question, is this game one of the top 50 best-selling games of all time? And interestingly enough, looking at this data, I did actually find that some of the best-selling games of all time are quite well spread out across the last 37 years. In fact, there are only 2 years in those 37 that feature more than one of the best-selling games ever, and those years are 1996, which featured Pokemon Red and Blue and Super Mario 64, and then you also have 2011 with Minecraft and Skyrim. For obvious reasons, you can't just solely base this on sales numbers, but it is a worthwhile contributing factor to my final decision. Originality. Arguably the most important category here because it can define so much about a game and its place in history, and it held a lot of weight when it came to me cross-referencing all of the different sections of my research. Now, when I say originality, I'm kind of being a little loose with that term, because if you wanted to get real strict and technical with it, then nothing is really original after the mid-90s and once the 3D era had arrived. So when I say originality, I'm asking the question, did this game do something original, or did it do something different within its respective genre? An obvious frontrunner for this section would be 1985 with Gauntlet, Ghosts and Goblins and Super Mario Bros. Also 1989 with Tetris, SimCity and Populous, because these are all great years for games that practically formed their respective genres. But as I said, I'm not being too strict on this one, so for example 1998 does well in this section with Metal Gear Solid, Half-Life and Dance Dance Revolution. Also worthy of a mention is 2005 with Guitar Hero, Shadow of the Colossus and Psychonauts. All of these games added something new and fresh to an existing formula, or they spawned completely new genres of their own. Franchise. This was the part of my research where I tried to find the years in gaming history that saw the launch of numerous huge franchises, because being there to see the start of something huge does add a little spice to things. A particular great year for this was 1986, which saw the launch of Bubble Bobble, Outrun and The Legend of Zelda, which I don't really need to explain how big those games would go on to be. Just a few years down the line in 1991, it would also be a stellar year for huge franchises such as Civilization, Lemmings, Sonic the Hedgehog, and although it was a sequel, we all know that Street Fighter really started with Street Fighter 2. Honestly, there are quite a few good years for this category, so I won't mention all of them, but I felt it was important to recognise this as I formed my final conclusions. Impact. So this category is kind of a two-parter, and the best way to explain my thinking would be to say that a game would get 1 point if it impacted its genre, but an extra point if it was so huge that it impacted the entire industry. A solid example for a good year with good impact is 1992, which offered up such hits as Gunstar Heroes, NBA Jam, Daytona USA and the original Doom, all games which certainly played a part in changing the course of their individual genres. You could also go with the year 2000 for impact too, because with games like Deus Ex, Counter-Strike, The Sims and Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, well, it's just too big to ignore. Best in genre. For this category, I wanted to scan through history to find the years that saw a high number of games that would absolutely be considered the best of the best in their genre. We're talking about games that either set the standard or at least raised the bar. One of the strongest years has to be 1995, which boasts not only Wipeout, not only Command & Conquer, but on top of those two you also have Yoshi's Island and Chrono Trigger. Another great year for this is my beloved 2004 with the previously mentioned Halo 2, Half-Life 2 and Snake Eater, but on top of those it has World of Warcraft, Burnout 3 and San Andreas. I mean, come on, how is this not the best year ever for games? Like, we're not even talking opinion, this is just factual. It's staring all of us in the face, and I'm not going to keep pretending that 2004 wasn't the best peak of the series. This one is somewhat self-explanatory, but I was basically looking for years that shared a high number of games that would be considered the peak of their individual franchises. 1997 does quite well here, with classics like Quake 2, Symphony of the Night and Final Fantasy VII. However, the strongest year from what I can see is 2009, a year which is basically the year of the two, because in 2009 we got Left 4 Dead 2, Assassin's Creed 2, Uncharted 2 and Modern Warfare 2, which is pretty hard to beat. Quantity. Once again, not much explaining to do here, because this is basically just the years that saw the highest number of games that consistently featured on the best games of all time lists. 2002 features a huge 10 games and was an incredibly impressive year with titles like Elder Scrolls Morrowind, Kingdom Hearts, Vice City, Metroid Prime, Soul Calibur 2 and many more. Also, one of the front runners in this category is 2008 with a ridiculous 13 games including Braid, Fallout 3, Gears of War 2, Spelunky, Street Fighter 4 and GTA 4. Hopefully these two examples give you some context as to why I didn't just go with quantity and then call it a day, because I wanted my conclusion to be formed by much more than just sheer numbers, even though these are some pretty great games. The Shrug Test. For the final category we have the Shrug Test, and now you're thinking, well, what is the Shrug Test? I know I should be as objective as possible when it comes to this video, but I thought, hey, it's my channel, so why not add a little smidge of my own opinion in there? So the Shrug Test basically means that if you were to tell me your favourite game of all time, and my response was, yeah, sure, and not, really? That means it passed the Shrug Test. Years in which the majority of games passed the Shrug Test include 1994, as it saw the release of Doom 2, Earthbound, Final Fantasy VI and Super Metroid. A similar year for this is 2005, because if you told me that Devil May Cry 3 or Splinter Cell Chaos Theory, Shadow of the Colossus or Resident Evil 4 was your favourite game of all time, then I would 100% look back at you and say, yeah, sure. Okay, that's the run through of all of the categories done and dusted. Now we collect all of this information to find the best year in gaming history. So here we finally are, we've almost reached the end. But before I cover the winner, I do want to cover some honourable mentions, because if I don't, I can already imagine the comment section. 2 years that are absolutely worth mentioning, and these aren't in any particular order, are both 1998 and 2007. 1998 is a standout year with hits like Soul Calibur, StarCraft, Metal Gear Solid, Panzer Dragoon Saga, Ocarina of Time and Half-Life. Way too many hits to ignore in this conversation, and performs really well across all of the categories that I discussed. 2007 is a year that I've heard time and time again as the best year in gaming, and it certainly is a strong one, with everything from BioShock to Call of Duty 4 to God of War 2, Halo 3, Mass Effect, Portal, Team Fortress and Mario Galaxy. Both of these are incredible years for games, and if you were to tell me that one of them was your favourite year ever for gaming, then I would not argue, but there is one that I think is a little better than the rest. So, after all of the consideration, after all of the scrutinising, and after all of the pondering, I find it really hard to look past 2001. Okay, let me explain, because I can already hear you typing on your keyboard about how I could not be more wrong. But in terms of quantity, quality, variety, impact and originality, 2001 wins for me, and here's why. Not only are we talking about a year that features 16 games that consistently make it onto the greatest games of all time list, but you're also talking about a bunch of games that tick a lot of boxes across all of the other categories that I mentioned. If you want games that are considered the peak of the series, no problem. Games like Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3, Smash Bros Melee and Gran Turismo A-Spec have you covered. If you want games that still hold up as some of the best a genre has to offer, no worries at all. Metal Gear Solid 2, Silent Hill 2 and Ikaruga will take care of you. If you want games that launched a whole new franchise, have no fear, Devil May Cry, Animal Crossing and Phoenix Wright are available. If you want games that feel new, fresh and original, well, rest easy, because Rez, Eco and Max Payne are here to answer the call. And finally, if you want games that made an immeasurable impact on not just their genres, but the industry as a whole, then boy are you in luck, because we've got Final Fantasy X, Halo Combat Evolved and Grand Theft Auto 3 to round things off. Across all of these categories, 2001 offers up pretty much everything you could ask for, and does so with variety. And I haven't even mentioned the bunch of games that didn't consistently make it onto the greatest games of all time lists that help elevate 2001 even more. You've got Onimusha Warlords, NBA Street, Red Faction, Shenmue 2, Pikmin, Jak and Daxter, Twisted Metal Black, and SSX Tricky. The real funny thing for me is that I was here for this. I was very much present during these days and buying up every single game that I could, but for some reason I completely overlooked it until I lined up all of the years next to each other. Now, I'm completely open to the idea that I have some small bias towards this year, as I was a kid during this period, and that is a very valid criticism. I'm sure some of you, or all of you, will disagree with me here on my final conclusion, but I hope at least you can agree that 2001 was an incredibly strong year for games. If you did enjoy this video, then feel free to do all of the usual good stuff, and I'm 1000% sure that someone's going to fire off in the comment and tell me I'm an idiot, but if you do have a respectful opinion on what your favourite year for gaming is, then feel free to let me know. That's going to do it for this video. I've been Inept Saiyan, you as always have been a wonderful audience, and I hope to see you next time.